Hey everyone, if you are at all a tabletop or board game player, then you probably know everything there is to know about Pandemic, a game created by Matt Leacock and released by Z-Man Games. It's a 2 to 4 player cooperative game, and it has numerous expansions and spin-offs at this point. But we're not here to talk about this game. We're actually here to talk about this new game called Pandemic Hot Zones North America. So what's the difference between this game and the original Pandemic? Let's crack it open and take a look. Okay, with the box cracked open, here are its contents. So we've got the Pandemic Hot Zones North America instruction booklet, and on the back here, and we'll cover this here in just a few minutes, we've got the differences from the original Pandemic. We've got 3 different bags here. One is containing all of our cards. One is containing our pawns and game pieces. And the last bag here is containing our disease cubes. And here is a look at the board itself. Now again, if you're familiar with the original Pandemic, you know that that game board covers the entire world. Whereas here, again, the game is called Pandemic Hot Zones North America. Our board is simply representing the North American continent. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the cards. Okay, I've got the cards here split out based on card type, so let's go over those here real quick. So first up here we have our city cards, and I've got a regular Pandemic card here just to kind of show you for comparison. You can see how much smaller these Hot Zone cards are than the regular Pandemic. So these are quite a bit smaller here. So those are the city cards. We also have our 3 epidemic cards. That's all that comes in the game, is just 3. We have our infection cards here. And again, all of these cards are the same size. We have these crisis cards. We have our event cards here. We have our player action cards and reference cards. And then lastly, we have our role cards. And in this game, there are only 4 roles. There's the generalist, there's the medic, there is the researcher, and there is the dispatcher. So let's go ahead and take a look at the board next. Okay, so taking a look here again at the board, you'll notice we've got some different areas here. So up here at the top, we've got where we'll put our infection deck, and we've also got our epidemic marker up here. Down here in the lower left-hand side, we've got our city cards and our discard pile. Down here in the bottom right, we've got our markers for the different diseases. And you'll notice that there are only 3 diseases here. There's red, yellow, and blue. And again, those are all that's represented here on the map. And then we have our outbreak marker up here as well. And you'll see that we can only have 4 outbreaks before the game itself ends. And then down below that, we do have a little reference here for player turns as well. Now, what I do like about this board is that we get several different cities that are brand new to Pandemic that we don't have in the original game. So like Monterey, for example, or we've got Havana, and there's lots of stuff down here, as well as kind of scattered throughout the United States here that's got some new cities that we don't have in the original. Okay, so let's go into more detail about the differences between this game and the original Pandemic. So one of the biggest changes here is, first and foremost, the number of diseases. So in the original Pandemic game, there are 4 diseases, and if you play one of the expansions with the original base game, you could have up to 5 different diseases. In this particular game, there are only 3. So there's red, there is yellow, and there is blue. Now, to go along with that, one of the other changes is that unlike the original Pandemic, where you were required to have 5 cards in order to cure disease, you only need 4, as indicated here on the disease marker down here on the board itself. One of the other big changes is that you're not allowed, or you cannot create additional research stations in this game. The only research station in the entire game is right here in Atlanta, and it's denoted by the little white research station icon here on the board. The game does not come with any research station tokens, so you cannot build them, and it's also not on the actions card. So anytime you want to cure a disease, you have to get back to Atlanta to do so. Let's see here. One of the other major changes during setup is that as you're drawing cards to do the initial setup, so for example, we're going to do New York, right? So this is my very first card. So we're going to put 3 cubes on that. And my second one here is Atlanta. So we'll put 3 cubes on that. Now, traditionally, in the original Pandemic, we would draw a third card, and that city would also get 3 cubes on it. Not the case in this particular game. We're only drawing 2 for each iteration. So, for example, we're done with the 3 cubes for the initial setup. Now we're drawing 2 cards for the 2 cubes. So, San Francisco, and then Miami. And now that's it for the 2 cube setup, and then we'll draw 2 cards for the 1 cube. So New Orleans, and then Calgary here. So that is all the setup that is needed for the initial setup for the game in order to get started. So again, you're drawing 2 cards for the 3 cubes, 2 cards for the 2 cubes, and 2 cards for the 1 cubes. Unlike the original game where you're drawing 3 for each. Let's see here. There are only 3 epidemic cards as well. So let me get those here out of the pile. There are only 3 epidemic cards, and you have to play with all of them. Regardless of how many people are playing, you're playing with all of these. This is not really where the difficulty setting comes into play. So in the original Pandemic, you could choose how many epidemic cards you wanted to use, and depending on the number that you chose, that kind of really sets your difficulty level. Well, you're not able to change or choose the number of epidemic cards you're using. You can change the difficulty by using these crisis cards, and you can either use 1 card per pile of the epidemic decks that you've got to create at the beginning, or you can use 2 per pile. So let's take a look at these here real quick. So we've got this limited options where it reduces a player's hand size to 5 cards as opposed to the normal 6. We've got this hotspot where it says draw the bottom card from the infection deck and place 3 matching cubes in that city, and then discard that card. We've got planes grounded, so players cannot do the direct flight or charter flight actions. We've got logistics failure where it says resolve the draw infection card step twice this turn. The One Quiet Night event is played, resolve the step once instead. This one's called sanitation failure, advance the infection rate marker unless it is already at the end of the track. This is unacceptable losses, draw the bottom card from the infection deck, return that infection card and 3 matching cubes to the box. And then we've got contamination where it says choose 1 pawn and check the color of their city, place 1 cube of that color on each connected city. If we take a look here at the roll cards, there are a few differences here on the researcher and the dispatcher compared to the original Pandemic as well. So those differences are, I'll just go ahead and read the action here. So for the dispatcher, it says move any pawn directly to any other pawn city, and then move another player's pawn to a connected city. And for the researcher, it says give a city card from your hand to another player in your city. That card does not need to match your city. So from there, the gameplay of Pandemic Hot Zone North America plays exactly like the original Pandemic. So each player will get 4 actions, and they can complete those actions, and then they're drawing additional cards for their hand, and then they're drawing the infection cards. Once they hit an epidemic, same rules apply from the original Pandemic. You're drawing the bottom card, placing 3 cubes on there, shuffling it back in with the discard pile, and then drawing the number of cards as indicated here by the infection marker. So I guess the question that you might be wondering is, if you own the original Pandemic, would you consider picking this up? And my answer to that question would be absolutely. So I am a huge fan of Pandemic. I've got the original Pandemic kind of sitting right over there. I've got a number of different expansions for it. I've got all but the Cthulhu and the Fall of Rome spin-off versions. But I'm a huge fan of Pandemic. The Matt Leacock games are really what got me into playing these designer type board games, and Pandemic is right up there at the top of the list for me. In this particular instance, the Pandemic Hot Zone North America game is a much smaller board, and it makes it for a more compact and easy to travel version of Pandemic. It takes up a much smaller footprint than the original, and then with the small cards here, you don't need a huge play area to play on. This would make, in my opinion, a great gift for people as well if you're trying to get them into board games, or if they happen to be a fan of board games but maybe haven't necessarily played any of the more well-known designer type board games. I think this would be a hit for those types of people. But again, with a much smaller box size, it is very light, very easy to travel, and it takes up significantly less space than the original Pandemic. So I'm a big fan of it. This is out there now. You can purchase this for $19.99 from Target. Target actually has it in their stores on the shelves. This is also available through online retailers, but I've not actually seen it available from the online retailers yet. It's still up for pre-order, but for some reason Target was able to get it in early and they've got it on the shelves. So if you happen to have a Target in the area, you're considering picking this up, I would highly recommend doing so, because for $20 you can't go wrong. What I'm curious to find out is whether or not they are going to be releasing additional Hot Zone versions of the game. So again, this one's called Pandemic Hot Zone North America, but I'm wondering, will we see a South America? Will we see an Africa? Will we see a Europe? Will we see an Asia? Because they could essentially do that for all of those. I think what this is really also ripe for is adding some additional expansions. I'm not quite sure what they could do entirely to modify the mini version of the board to add an expansion. I don't think adding an additional disease would work on this small of a board, but I think at least I'm hoping that Matt Leacock has kind of thought about that, and that if they do release some expansions, that it'll help not improve the gameplay, because the gameplay is already pretty fantastic, but help alter the gameplay in such a way that it kind of warrants needing or wanting to purchase the expansion for it. If they don't release expansions, though, I'm pretty happy with it. And again, I think this is perfect for anyone who, even if you happen to own the original Pandemic, I think you'll still really enjoy this game. But again, if you are someone who's just trying to maybe dabble their toe or foot into the pool of these designer board games, I would highly recommend picking this up. And again, I think it would make a great or fantastic gift.